My wife Kimmy and I departed on our cruise 2 days ago. We've been looking forward to this cruise for the last 5 months, and as the days dwindled down, we could hardly contain our excitement. Over the last 4 days, we flew to Australia and boarded our cruise ship, excited for our 16-day vacation, one we each sorely needed. Our ship took off with no problems. We got situated in our room, went swimming, ate at one of the many restaurants here, and swam in an amazing infinite pool. We ended the night with a glass of champagne on the upper balcony of the cruise ship. It was truly amazing. We went to bed, and Kimmy fell fast asleep, much to my dismay. I browsed the internet on my phone for a little while before passing out myself. At about 2 a.m., I woke up and noticed my wife wasn't next to me. I assumed she was using the bathroom, so I turned over. My eyes were still closed once I faced the other way, and I would have never noticed she was there if I wouldn't have felt her breath on my face. I opened my eyes, and she was kneeling down on my side of the bed, breathing heavily, with her eyes as wide as she could get them. Her hair was stringy, and her face was damp from sweat, even through our air-conditioned room. It was absolutely horrifying. I jumped backwards across the bed and almost fell off the other side. "Kimmy," I asked. She just stayed in her kneeling position and panted, with her eyes fixed on me. I said her name once more, and she began breathing slower. I sat there in horror as she stood up, walked around to the side of the bed that I was now on, and began to crawl in as I slid back over to my side. She let out a weak, "Get back to your side," and laid down. Then, she fell asleep like nothing had happened. I laid there for the rest of the night with more anxiety than I've ever felt before. My heart was practically beating out of my chest, and I had cold sweats for hours. I felt immense relief when the sun came up. When she woke up, I asked Kimmy about what had happened during the night. She didn't remember anything. She said she remembers getting up to go to the bathroom, then moving me over because I had rolled to her side of the bed when she went. I told her it really freaked me out, but she insisted I had just had a weird bad dream. I knew the truth. Kimmy was complaining of a headache, so we decided to order breakfast in instead of going to the buffet. Kimmy got a huge meal. It's unbelievable how much that girl can eat without gaining an ounce. She's 5'2" and tiny. She got 4 pancakes, 2 scrambled eggs, 3 strips of bacon, 3 sausage links, and an order of hash browns. I got what they call a sausage scrambler. The food took a little while to get there, all the while Kimmy mentioning how she didn't feel good and hoped that eating would help her ailments. Our food was delivered to our room, and we sat down to eat. Kimmy took the lid off of her tray and slid back in her chair with a look of disgust on her face. I asked what was wrong, and she said, "You're kidding, right? You don't smell that?" I told her I didn't smell anything besides our food. She looked at her tray with a grimace and broke off a small piece of bacon. She brought it to her mouth and bit into it, and immediately spit it back out, gagging. "What?" I asked. "It fucking tastes like old, stale, raw meat, Nick. What do you mean, what?" The food looked fine. The food smelled fine. There was literally nothing wrong with it. She refused to eat it and made me take it out of our room. After I threw her food away, I went down to the buffet and got her a bowl of fruit, which she happily accepted and ate without objection. After eating, Kimmy decided to take a shower in preparation for the day ahead of us. While she did that, I laid on the bed and watched TV. I dozed off for a while, considering I hadn't slept much the night before, and woke up a little over an hour later. I had to triple check my phone for the time because I could still hear the shower running in the bathroom. I knocked on the door and got no response. I was scared at this point. I had no idea what I was going to find on the other side of that door. Had she slipped and hit her head? I didn't know what to expect. I announced that I was going to enter and proceeded through the door. I didn't see her anywhere in the bathroom, so I decided she must still be in the shower itself. The curtain was closed. I inched my way towards it, with my lifelong love of horror movies telling me something was going to jump out at me any second. Nothing ever jumped. I slowly slid the curtain open to find Kimmy standing there, facing me, with her eyes as wide as they were the night before. "Kimmy, what are you doing?" I asked, halfway in a panic as I slowly backed away. It was then I noticed that the entire lower right half of her body, the part that was getting splashed with water, was red. There was no fog in the bathroom, though, and no steam was coming from the shower. She had the water on as cold as it could go. Kimmy, I shouted. She snapped out of it instantly and yelped. When did you get in here? You scared the shit out of me, she said as she turned the water off. I scared the shit out of you? What the fuck was that? What was what? You don't know what just happened. What are you talking about? She insisted as she stepped out of the tub and wrapped herself in a towel. I explained what had just happened. She acted completely dumbfounded and told me that I was going crazy. She finished getting ready, and we went about our day. Everything was fine until we went to one of the infinite pools. We were tucked away in our little section of the somewhat crowded pool, just talking and relaxing in the perfect water under the hot sun. I don't remember what we were talking about, but suddenly, Kimmy stopped talking mid-sentence and became fixated on something just over my shoulder. I looked behind me and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I asked her what she was looking at, but she just kept her eyes locked on whatever she saw. I took another slow, nervous look behind me, and when I turned back, she was gone. It was only a second before I noticed she was underwater. I kind of awkwardly just stood there for a couple seconds, not sure if she was playing a joke on me or what. Then I myself went under the water and opened my eyes. When I did, she was directly in front of my face, with her eyes, now bloodshot from the chlorine, wide open as they had been the last 2 times something weird had happened. On instinct, I moved backwards, but she stayed with me, only inches from my face. I returned to the surface and caught my breath. She didn't. I grabbed her by her shoulders and brought her up to the surface, but her body was limp, and she immediately fell back under. I grabbed her again and held her above water, saying her name over and over. People started to look towards us with concern. Then, as if nothing had happened, she came back to. She looked me in the eyes with a normal look and kissed me. She asked why I looked so worried, but I didn't even bother trying to explain. The rest of the day went on without incident. A couple games of shuffleboard, a stop at the jacuzzi, and dinner, and things were okay. We got back to the room, had some private time, and decided to call it a night. Around the same time as the previous night, 2 a.m., I woke up once again. This time I was facing Kimmy as I slept, and when I opened my eyes, I found her to be laying on the bed, facing me, with her eyes wide open, with a slight smirk on her face. I whispered her name. She was breathing heavily again, like panting. I whispered her name a little louder as I sat up on the bed. Her eyes stayed fixed on mine as I moved. I placed my hand on her head and found her to be freezing cold. I said her name once more, this time at normal volume, and she let out a piercing shriek that, while short, surely woke the entire floor. It made me jump backwards and fall off my edge of the bed. With my back to the wall, I watched as my wife turned over onto her hands and knees, and now, with her wide eyes and a smile on her face, crawl around the surface of the bed, on no discernible path, with her huge brown eyes fixed on mine the whole time. Then, she stood up and let her head hang to the side. She stood like that, staring through me, until almost 3:30 a.m., before she calmly crawled down and went back to sleep. Some things happened today that I will detail tomorrow, but I just wanted to get this piece up so I can hopefully get some advice. Hi, my name is Riley. Just want to give a little background before I explain what happened. It wasn't until I met my fiancée that I really started getting out into the world. Growing up, my family was always one for camping, picnics, or anything else within driving distance, really. Things really changed when I met her. I'll call her Rachel. I wish there was a better way of saying this, but simply put, she makes enough for us to go out and do amazing things and create equally amazing memories. I really do love her though. She's amazing and obviously the one. Okay, I'll spare you the sappy stuff and fast forward to today. We are on a cruise. It's my second one ever and first one that's more than one night long. Our friends Bill and Sarah are on it with us. We are calling it a birthday cruise since it left the day of Bill's birthday. I wish I were writing here to tell you about all the awesome parties, poolside cocktails, and everything else cruise related, but I'm not. I saw something on the first night and I haven't been able to sleep since. Today is day 2 of this 4-day, 3-night cruise. I am confused and am hoping someone here can help me. If you've been on a cruise, you know the rooms are tiny, the coffee is older than the ship, and that the TV selection is painfully limited. It was about 10 p.m. and we had been lying in bed for about 30 minutes. I looked at Rachel, and her deep, peaceful breathing told me she was fast asleep. Still excited from leaving port, and maybe a tad queasy, I decided to turn on the TV to mellow out. I picked up the sad-looking remote from the bedside table and found a strange comfort in seeing the back held closed by black electrical tape. Being from a somewhat lower-income family, this was a common sight at home. I instantly began to relax and begun flipping through the channels. Channel 1 was a channel dedicated to the ship logistics, where we were, how fast we were going, where we were going, etc. It didn't take me long to get bored of that and press down on the ancient tic-tac of a channel up button. The loud clack as it pressed down told me it hadn't been used often. Channel 2 was about ship events. The cruise coordinator, Saul, was on the screen talking about the next day's activities. He was a perplexing individual. I'd call it exhaustingly enthusiastic. His face screamed, "I've been doing this too damn long," while his voice went into cheery detail about the finer things that are shuffleboard and the proper way to score it. Even the display on screen gave a half-baked, cheesy feel. It was clearly shot with Saul in front of a green screen as the background and shadowing came nowhere close, matching his half-enthused body movements. I could feel my eyes beginning to droop and knew it wouldn't be long before I joined Rachel in a long night of sleep. I gave the channel up button one more click. I wish I hadn't. I wish I had just fallen asleep. I wish what I saw was a dream. It wasn't. The screen flipped to the next channel, but it wasn't channel 3. It was channel 228. I didn't think much of it in the brief instant between reading the number and my mind visually interpreting what the screen was displaying. It wasn't like the previous 2 channels. It was grainy, black and white, and there was no sound. I assumed that this was just a really old film at first. One of the old ones with no sound and intermittent text boxes to fill the void. In any case, I was intrigued and suddenly less sleepy. I watched, and the crashing of the waves against the outside of the ship was the only sound to keep me company while I did. The screen showed a top-down view of what looked like a very old hospital bed. The room appeared to be dark and rustic with a cement floor and less than optimal lighting. There was a man on the bed in just boxer briefs. He was alive based on his gradual movements, no more than slowly moving his head from one side to the other. But I can't say with any certainty what state of consciousness he was in. He wasn't just strapped in, he appeared to be chained in. His legs were chained together. The chain wrapped from his legs to the underside of the bed. His arms were chained out over the edge of the bed, with his limp hands facing downward. Another chain wrapped tightly around his neck and around the bed, just like his legs. On either side of him were 2 men. I would have assumed they were doctors, but they weren't wearing any sort of scrubs. They were wearing suits. Nice suits. One of the men looked a bit on the stubby, larger side, with short, wavy, slicked-back hair. He appeared middle-aged from what I could see. The other man was the opposite. Dark hair, taller, leaner, and noticeably younger. I'd say in his late 20s. It was very hard to tell with the video quality being what it was. They stood with arms behind their backs, looking down at the man on the bed. I watched as another man entered the picture. I can say that he definitely resembled that of a doctor. He at least had a long white jacket on, and had a number of sharp objects in a tray he carried over. He was entirely bald, and had a white goatee with what looked like circle-framed glasses. The doctor pulled one of the sharp objects off his tray and examined it, twisting it from side to side in his fingers. He then looked down at the man in the bed. I could see the doctor's mouth move, but couldn't make out what he was saying. In one quick movement, the doctor swiftly moved the sharp object parallel from about halfway up the man's left arm, down to about his left wrist. I expected the man in the bed to lurch or tense up, but he didn't. The nicely dressed men seemed to have no reaction either. Blood began to ooze at a steady pace from his left arm, while the doctor moved to the other side of his body. I knew what was coming next. Another swift movement and a second flow of blood. I hadn't noticed until this point, but there were 2 square white containers under each arm to catch the blood. The dark blood now pooling in the bottom was an easy contrast to see against the whiteness that surrounded it. All 3 of the other men in the room stood just looking down at this poor man. What happened next is what keeps me from sleeping. I must have watched the screen for a good 2 or 3 minutes, while the stream of blood from the man's wrist went from a steady flow to a few light drips every few seconds. I noticed his head was no longer moving from side to side. I don't know why I kept watching. The cynical doubt of this being an old horror movie had already crept inside my head. Maybe it was a morbid fantasy, or maybe I was holding on to the smallest shred of hope that some sort of credits would begin to scroll up the screen. At that moment, we hit what I assumed to be some rougher seas, and I heard a particularly hard wave from outside, and the boat lurched to the left. I kept my eyes on the screen and watched as horror as the blood that filled the containers sloshed to the left side in unison. This wasn't a movie, this was a video stream, and it was from somewhere on this ship. I quickly, but quietly, picked up the TV guide card to try and find out what channel 228 was supposed to be, but the card only had channels 1 through 30. You know that feeling of being watched, where the hairs stand up on your neck and you get that tickle in your throat? Where your breathing sounds like a hurricane, and any movement of your joints sounds like the loudest, creakiest door from your grandparents' house. I felt it bad. I stared at the card. I held my breath and slowly moved my head and eyes up. I could hear the joints in my vertebrae creaking as my eyes met the screen. All three men were staring back. I sat motionless, unable to think. The picture faded to static. I have no idea what the fuck that was. I don't want to tell Rachel and ruin her trip, in case this was some crazy fluke murder mystery show, but I just have a horrible feeling that it's not. And why the fuck were they staring back? Dramatic effect? It just felt like they were staring directly through the screen at me. I looked through the crew's activity catalog and saw nothing related to murder mystery. I am too scared to ask anyone who works on the ship about it. I think I'm going to talk to Bill about it and see what he says. He's one of my oldest friends, and I know I can trust him. It's only a matter of time before the lack of eating and dark circles under my eyes give me away anyways. Maybe talking to him will make me feel good enough to get a few hours tonight. Hopefully, maybe a drink will ease my mind for now.